Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be beginning in just a couple of minutes, but in the meantime, I'd love to tell you about some upcoming courses. Tomorrow, October 6th, we've partnered with Anthony Effelton and Becca Freed from Health Research for Action at UC Berkeley to offer a free webinar on health literacy and practice, risk communication. On Tuesday, October 12th, we'll be joined by Emma Moynihan, MPH, from Johns Hopkins Education and Research Center for Occupational Safety and Health for a free webinar on quantifying occupational heat stress among U.S. agricultural workers. Physical Human Factors and Ergonomics is an online course with Dr. Jim Potman that will be beginning next Monday, October 11th. And on behalf of education and research centers throughout the country, we're pleased to present the Industrial Hygiene Webinar Series. This is a collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program and aspires to provide access to current research supported through NIOSH ERC programs and also NIOSH trainees. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Today's webinar, Promoting Sanitation Worker Health and Safety Through Social Enterprise, is brought to you by the Northern California NIOSH ERC and Rachel Sklar, PhD. A few housekeeping items first. You'll be muted during this presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the online Q&A box. We'll save time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page. All participants who logged in with their registration email for the full live presentation today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the evaluation form that will qualify participants for a certificate of completion with one continuing education contact hour. Once the evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. And at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome our presenter for today, Rachel Sklar, PhD. Dr. Sklar is a researcher and social entrepreneur with experience working on sanitation and environmental health in over 7 countries. Her research focuses on quantifying health risks to sanitation workers and bringing light to the invisibility of their plight. Rachel founded Vidura, a social enterprise which equips informal sanitation workers in Rwanda with the tools and training necessary to formalize their services and provide basic sanitation for informal settlements and refugee camps. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to learning more about your work.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'll get started. Thank you everyone for coming. And joining me for lunch. I apologize in advance for the graphical content if you are indeed eating lunch, so just be warned. I'm going to talk to you about some work that we are doing in Kigali to bring light to the risks that sanitation workers endure worldwide, really, but focusing specifically on some recent work that we've done in East Africa. So the world is urbanizing rapidly. Globally, people are moving to city centers more rapidly than ever before. Climate change is driving a lot of this. People are migrating from rural areas to the cities, from traditional and agricultural ways of life to jobs in the city, better opportunities. And as the world's population continues to urbanize at such a rapid pace, adequate sanitation infrastructure is a crisis that all cities, especially those that are rapidly growing, are grappling with now. By 2030, we expect that almost 5 billion people will be using on-site sanitation systems. So these are not sewer systems. These are pit latrines, septic tanks, that need to be emptied when they are full. So sewers simply can't keep up with the rate of urbanization. They use an immense amount of water and energy and cost millions of dollars to build and maintain. Besides being super expensive, large-scale sewer networks can entail per capita costs that are up to 5 times higher than on-site systems, and that's just not feasible in many parts of the world. So when these sanitation systems fill, they need to be emptied and the waste needs to be safely managed. This sanitation value chain framework as I'm showing in this diagram, sort of recognizes that unless the containment, emptying, transport, treatment, and disposal of the fecal sludge is conducted carefully, properly, hygienically, safely, then communities and workers may be exposed. But in low-income areas, in unplanned settlements, most people cannot afford to hire the exhauster trucks, which are by and large the existing solution for emptying a full sanitation system. And anyway, most of these exhauster trucks can't fit into the dense and narrow alleyways and informal road networks that are very common where low-income folks live in these rapidly urbanizing areas. So in these places, in informal settlements, people rely on manual pit emptiers or excavators to remove the waste from the full pit or the septic tank. And that waste is most commonly dumped in the environment, either buried on site in the compound where the people live, or dumped into an open drain or a body of water where the community may be exposed to the pathogens in the sludge. This is what it looks like. And this is an obvious violation of human rights, an obvious public and environmental health hazard. And when you think about it, you know, the intended purpose of toilets and pit latrines is to separate humans from their contagious waste, from their contagious feces. Yet in these dense areas, the system relies on sending workers directly into the festering pit of feces to remove that waste. So the health of the community really comes at the expense of these marginalized informal workers. So yes, pit latrines protect communities from health risks, but the risks are just migrated to the workers. And because all of this is happening in the informal economy, these workers are invisible, yet everywhere, all over the world, from the Dalit in India to certain tribes in East Africa, these practices persist because they're the only choice for many people. And even when trucks are used, the waste often ends up in the environment anyway. You know, dumping the waste in the environment instead of driving all the way to the dump site or the wastewater treatment plant means that trucks can save money on fuel costs and avoid tipping fees at the dump. I'll show you some video from Nigeria of what this could look like. That is the human waste collected from a number of facilities, and they're just dumping it out in the environment of someone's house. Oops. So we developed a solution to offer safe and affordable services for low-income households in Kigali, Rwanda. This is an organization that I helped found in 2016 when I initially started doing research in Rwanda. And I currently sit on the board of this organization, and it's run completely by Rwandans. And what we've done is, and what the org continues to do, is train and employ local waste workers who have been doing this work informally for all their lives, and equip them with the tools that they need to provide the safe services to these low-income areas. So the idea is that they're providing services that are safe for the households and services that also protect them. So how do they do it? Well, one big thing has been technology development. Vidura has developed a pit-to-road pumping system that speeds up how fast this process can be done. When they were doing it manually, it could take hours. It could take an entire night. Now they can do it in a few hours, just removing the waste using pumps. So a typical exhauster truck can reach only 10 meters from the pit to the road, which doesn't help much in these very dense settlements, like I mentioned before, because the trucks can't drive into them. But we now have a system that can reach up to 200 meters from where the truck is parked. So this allows the workers to serve low-income households, but do it in a way that's safe, that doesn't require them to manually carry out the sludge. And here is a video of, we call it the do-vac because it's a double vacuum in action. Oops. So here we are, that was the pit. This is a hose that's basically pumping the sludge out of the pit into this hopper and into the first container. And then once the sludge is in that container, sometimes we take a sample, which is what he's just done. So once the sludge is in that container, then the secondary pump, which is the pump which is on the truck, is used to pump over the distance between the truck and the household. So imagine doing this before manually. You would have no choice but to just dump the sludge wherever you could. Look at how narrow these places are. So that's the hose, still going, still going. Yeah, but instead of jumping into a pit full of waste, the workers now operate this system of what's basically a daisy chain of pumps. The first pump that you saw empties the waste from the pit into that initial container, and then the second pump, which is on the truck, is connected to this hose, which removes it from the primary container into the truck where it's carried away. You can see the truck in the distance now. Aha, there it is. Another thing that they're doing is they're building a pretty integrated IT platform that uses text messages and phone calls to geographically cluster people who need and request the service instead of driving around town and spending extra time on money and fuel. Sometimes we like to explain this as the Uber pool of fecal sludge. The idea is that people are sharing the cost of a truck coming out to empty their toilet. And if more people can afford the service, it's more stable work for the sanitation workers. So cost reduction is always a priority for us, an ongoing priority for us, for the community to be able to afford the service, and again, for the workers to have enough work. Every single day, they collect thousands of data points on the cost of emptying different areas, the logistical constraints, customer satisfaction, the wait times, traffic, like any logistic data collection. And this is we think, the most precise data on fecal sludge management logistics that's really out there. And so as urbanization continues to explode, every city will be asking itself these questions of how to plan and run and scale a sanitation system. And the data that we have will be at the heart of these decisions. So again, like any logistics organization, we track our logistics and use the data to figure out how to lower costs. Another part of the data collection we do is, of course, on worker exposures. So I'm going to talk about a project that I did with the org as part of my PhD, actually. So what we did was we used a quantitative microbial risk assessment framework to estimate health risks to workers at each stage in the process, from collection even up to dumping and treating and resource recovery that was done on the waste. So QMRA is a 4-step process where the first step is identifying the hazard, so the concentration of, in this case, pathogens in the fecal matter that the workers are handling. The second step is to look at dose response curves for that particular pathogen that link the concentration to disease outcomes. And then the exposure assessment to understand how much the workers are exposed to, which leads to characterizing the risks and how to plan control measures, really. And at the heart of this process, which is specifically used to measure the concentration of, to measure the risks to microbial pathogens, is a Monte Carlo simulation method, which means, so most of the parameters in this type of model are represented by a distribution of values instead of a single point value. And this type of modeling allows us to incorporate a lot of variability and uncertainty of microbial concentrations and other scenario-specific factors. So we used participatory research methods to do this work. A subset of workers was trained to collect the samples. They learned how to use various instrumentation, a lot about exposure science, and here we are doing hand rinse samples to quantify the pathogens that accumulate on a worker hand during a shift and on a worker glove. And then another data collector is also quantifying the number of hand-to-mouth or hand-to-face contacts that happen during a shift so that we can estimate how much of the accumulated pathogen on the hands and gloves maybe makes it to the mouth and gets ingested by the worker. We also did personal air sampling to look at the particulate matter and endotoxin workers were exposed to over a shift. Everyone was super into it. Before we decided to do the project, we spent a lot of time getting to know each other, understanding what people's concerns were in terms of their work environment, working with fecal sludge every day. They really helped us identify the critical points in the process. And we talked about potential ways that we could test their exposure and ease their own existing health concerns. So this was all a very dynamic planning process. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that QMRA model. So we did direct measurements for 3 parameters in that model. 1, the concentration of bacteria on worker hands and gloves. Also, we looked at the ratio of pathogens and indicator organisms in the bulk sludge samples. And we, like I mentioned in the last slide, had someone measuring the frequency of hand-to-mouth or hand-to-face activity during a work task. So I'll tell you how we used these various data. For the bulk samples of the fecal sludge, we looked at the concentration of indicators and pathogens in that same sample. So this gave us the pathogen indicator ratio that you see here on the left. And then with the worker hand rinse samples, we measured the concentration of indicator bacteria and used that ratio we developed from the bulk samples to estimate pathogen concentration on hands and gloves. And once we had estimates for concentrations of pathogens on hands and gloves, we estimated how much of that got ingested by incorporating the observed frequency of hand-to-mouth contact for different tasks, literature values for the fractional surface area of a hand, that's mouth, the transfer efficiency of the pathogen from the hand or the glove to the mouth or the lips, and the viability of the pathogen on hands or gloves, which we actually assumed to be 100. We just made that conservative assumption. And what we found was that between the 2 pathogens and we had 2 major task groups, the collection tasks and the tasks that happened at the actual facility treating the sludge. So what we found was that between the two pathogens that we tested for in both task groups, adenovirus posed a higher risk of gastrointestinal disease, which was our disease outcome, and getting exposed to adenovirus during the collection activities was the highest risk scenario. As far as the inhalation hazards, we used endotoxin. We concentrated on endotoxin because endotoxin is a known hazard in very similar types of work, composting facilities, solid waste. And what we found was that once the waste arrives at the plant and starts undergoing this 3-stage drying process, which you can see in this chart, mechanical dewatering, solar dehydration, and thermal dryer, the endotoxin exposure increases with a decrease in the moisture of the fecal sludge that's being handled. So this particular facility was taking the fecal waste and turning it into a type of fuel. And that was mostly a drying process. So as it got drier, it got dustier and exposure went up. That makes total sense. And then we think that the pit latrine and the inlet concentrations were so high, despite the high moisture content, because for those tasks, workers get very close to the sludge itself. Oops, my slides are moving without me. And so they get really close to the sludge and they're likely to be exposed to droplets at close range. And that's sort of supported by comparing the area sample data to the personal sample data of the pit latrine task. You can see the concentrations from the area samples are an order of magnitude lower than those of the personal samples, which makes a lot of sense. So since the study, we have had a number of worker-led efforts to make the process more safe. In the first panel, we see the workers testing out a new splash guard. And on the right, we see the workers developing a backpack to carry barrels, which are used to hold trash that's removed from the pits in the septic tank. Solid waste, people sometimes dispose it in the toilets. So they have to remove that solid waste so that they can use the pumps more effectively. So what you see on the right is an effort to make that carrying of the trash more ergonomic. And this was a completely worker-led effort. They used lift and load guides according to OSHA standards, and they developed this poo pack, they call it, to make this part of the process more ergonomic. I'd like to share a video with you that's going to show one of the workers, Jean-Baptiste, and what he has to say about his job.
mbere wabonaga amafaranga mashini ka Vidura kuba nazi amaga ndetse no gupfukamunwa umuntu abayiri kabwawe ntabwo bucyongeye kubucukura kuba nagira muri piti Vidura nabonye imitandukano ritandukanye cyane nuko nakoraga mbere ko muri piti Vidura dufite ibikoresho guhera ku mabote masarubeti amaga ndetse no gupfukamunwa umuntu abayirinze twaba dufite imodoka dukoresha imashini ka Vidura kuba natagira kuyikoramo impinduka narazibonye mfitemo itandukaniro rinini cyane nuko nakoraga mbere kuko mbere wabonaga amafaranga ukayabona nka rimwe mu cyumweru cya kabiri ariko kuva najya muri piti Vidura ndakora amafaranga kaza mbere nk'ividura bya analogue nabaga mfite nk'isoni niko navuga ariko kuva nagira muri piti Vidura mbona bikoranye bikoze nishimye kandi mbese nta kimwaro bintera mu makeya ni akazi munze cyane
twari tugeze naho umuturage ashobora kuba
So that was Jean-Baptiste, and he is now actually a team leader of one of the teams that goes out and does the empties. So I wanted to show this slide for those of you who are thinking at this point in the presentation that we should just build sewers that would avoid all of this mess. So the first graph shows how urban populations are rising faster than rural populations, and all groupings of low and middle income countries. By 2050, the urban population of these countries will total 3 billion. These are countries which presently have limited sewage networks in urban areas right now. In Africa, the percentage of the population using sewers has actually fallen from 13 to 11%. So the fact that there's been this backwards progress in African sewerage between 2000 and 2015 suggests that non-sewered sanitation is going to need attention. And these systems need to be carefully thought out to ensure that the benefits are not just for the communities who use them, but for the workers who operate them. Workers and communities, deserve to live productive, healthy, and dignified lives. So we really need to think about how to continue to do these types of risk assessments for various different types of emerging sanitation systems, and prioritizing them before the systems are designed. I know you all must have a lot of questions, so I am going to open it up a little bit early for the questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation. We do have some questions rolling into the online chat in Q&A. If you want to go ahead and just ask your questions in the Q&A box to all of our attendees, I'm happy to go through them. It's easier for us to keep track of all the questions in the Q&A versus the chat, so I'll just ask you to put questions there. Our first question, what OSHA equivalent requirements apply in the countries that have the manual septic tank emptying?
None.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of this work is done informally, like I mentioned. In fact, I didn't even mention that many of the workers that we're working with now, they initially, they're hidden. They don't want to be known because on the one hand, the work is illegal because you're dumping human waste in the environment. But on the other hand, there's no choice. So these people do this work illegally, without any sort of government sanctions or anything like that. They're looked down upon in their community, and they usually do this work in the middle of the night. So when I was a PhD student, I would be, sort of running around these informal settlements in the middle of the night looking to see who was emptying waste, because that's when they do it so that they won't be caught by the authorities. So it's this catch-22. There's no other choice, but it's illegal. And because it's illegal, there are no OSHA equivalent types of guidelines for this type of work, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to bring visibility to the work. We're trying to make the work, at some baseline safe, and work from there to make it safer and safer, and part of a real sanitation system.
Thank you. Another question. What method do you follow for the personal air monitoring? For example, how are you collecting samples on the workers?
Yeah, so they, not sure if you mean specific methods or general methods, but we kind of developed a method. We had the workers wear the pumps that pulled air onto Teflon filters. We had them wear the samplers for the duration of their task. And at the end of the task, they took up the monitors, we took the filters, and analyzed them for endotoxin using the limulus amoebocyte lysate assay, which is a kinetic assay. Probably don't want to hear the details of that, but if you do, feel free to email me. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Are pump repairs and replacement parts readily available locally where the system is in use?
Great question. So replacement parts and the supply chains are killer. I mean, in a way that this is the reason why many of these businesses, these informal businesses, can't do things more safely. There's no supply chain. So that's part of the work that Vidura is doing. I didn't talk about it today because this is a talk about industrial hygiene and exposure science, but that's really key to the work that we're doing. Figuring out how to manufacture those replacement parts in country. Welding, we're looking at 3D printing for some of the pump and truck part replacements now. And just figuring out the supply chain, narrowing it down, figuring out if it's better to get X thing from Dubai or Germany, or those are, two of the main sources for these parts in Kigali. And as we figure it out, we're sort of sharing that knowledge with other sanitation enterprises in the region, so that they can thrive and not have to cut corners because they need to save money and time to get those replacement parts elsewhere. But that's certainly a huge problem, the supply chain, and it really kills the possibility of these businesses and historically.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, I would also like to ask a follow-up question. You mentioned there's the information sharing among other sanitation enterprises in the region. Have you found that this is an effort that you've seen popping up amongst other organizations, other cities, or is this really something that you haven't seen much of?
Certainly. I mean, this is a whole field. We're just a part of it. I mean, I will say that these guys have pioneered a lot of the worker safety stuff in particular. But safe, affordable, efficient sanitation services, I mean, this is a huge field. And, some of our sponsors that are listed here on the bottom of this slide have sort of, fostered this knowledge sharing and helped fund it. So we're really grateful for that and hope to continue to do that because it's so important. Every context is different. I mean, ideally, we can build a robust global database on the sanitation logistics in every one of these exploding cities so that enterprises can leverage that data and figure out how to do things efficiently and safely.
Thank you so much for sharing. And another thing I wanted to note is that you mentioned that you participate now as a board member and that this is actually very much a community-run organization. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that as a structure for your organization as well, and why you chose that as a structure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a loaded question. I mean, for me personally, doing this type of work, I view myself as a researcher, and I can certainly do the research and facilitate some of the implementation of these ideas, but most of them are not my ideas. The best ideas come from people who experience the problem, and while I can offer my research resources, the qPCR that we did for the pathogen testing, and the various other diagnostics that we've done over the years, the solutions are right there where we're working, and that's I think the most sustainable way to do this work.
Thank you so much. I wanted to highlight that, especially as the social enterprise. So thank you for sharing. We also have a comment that from one of our attendees that your work is so important and unique as few academic studies ever include helping with the implementation of corrective measures. Someone just wanted to add that comment and share that with you.
It is unique, and it shouldn't be unique. You know, we shouldn't stop at the research. We shouldn't stop at just collecting and extracting. It feels very extractive to do it in that way, you know, which sort of led into this whole founding of the org.
Thank you. Some other questions. With the increase in the population using this service, are the treatment facilities being expanded to handle the increase in waste?
Yeah, theoretically they should be, and in a lot of places they are. Unfortunately, for now in Kigali, they're not. There is a bid out there for a pretty massive facility that's being that's in the works. So it is in the works, but you know they're not necessarily keeping up. This is, you know, another thing we talk about in sanitation: the importance of every part of that sanitation value chain being paid attention to and given resources for. You know, because without the collection, a wastewater treatment plant, what are they going to do? Or a resource recovery plant, if they don't have enough waste, they're not going to generate enough, you know, value-added product to sell and sort of invest back into the system. And if there's no treatment, then, you know, there are obvious consequences to having that waste in the environment. So yeah, all the parts of the chain are very important. It's kind of hard to, you know, synergistically invest in all of them, and that's something that the sector is grappling with at large. I will, just one thing to add to that, I will say that, you know, I didn't talk about it much in this talk, but resource recovery systems, so systems that take the waste and generate fuel or, you know, compost or chicken feed or whatever it is, these resource recovery systems can generate enough, sometimes they can generate enough revenue to reinvest into other parts of the value chain, and that's really helpful. So,
thank you. Do you know if facility treatment workers are provided the same level of training in PPE?
It really depends on the context. It really depends on who is running the plant. Is it, you know, an African utility? Is it an informal group of people trying to use the sludge for something? Is it, you know, a Western run company? Or it really depends, but there's no sort of unifying or standard practice for the treatment plants that I've seen in sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you. Another question, what type of diseases were more prevalent among employees as a result of prolonged exposure to environmental pollution created by unsanitary working conditions? Are you able to speak to any of the diseases that were prevalent amongst employees?
Yeah, I mean, endless. A lot of them are gastrointestinal, which is why for our model, we looked at HCGI, so it's highly credible gastrointestinal disease, all kinds of diarrheal diseases. I mean, with endotoxin, there's you know, some impairment in breathing and lung function, as well as, you know, the other particulate matter that these guys are exposed to that can contain other types of irritants. Yeah, I mean, mostly pathogens though, viruses, bacteria. You know, sometimes if a worker has a skin lesion, it can be, we didn't look at this pathway, but if there's a skin lesion, there can be pathogenic entry through that route. and non-pathogenic exposures. I mean, for the manual workers, asphyxiation from the gases that are in the septic tanks or in the pit latrines that are building up. You often hear about sanitation workers in India dying of asphyxiation because of their exposure in this confined space. There are, like I mentioned, a lot of people dump waste, like garbage, into their toilets because in some places there's just not enough solid waste collection. And if a worker encounters, needles or sharp objects, bottles, pieces of bottles, they can get gashes during work. This is all fairly common in this type of non-sewered sanitation work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all those different exposures. Has anyone assessed the improvement to public health for the community? For example, the impacts of not dumping waste around people's homes. Have you been able to quantify any of that impact?
Yeah, I mean, so there was a huge study, sort of different, but done by Jack Colford, was one of the main PIs at UC Berkeley. Huge project called the Wash Benefits Project, and they looked at the impact of toilets, some food interventions like nutritional interventions, and hygiene behavior marketing on disease prevalence in children under the age of 5, because they are the ones who are most susceptible to diarrheal disease illnesses, which are the illnesses that are most commonly caused by exposure to feces. And interestingly, they found a lot, but they found that toilets weren't really enough to stop the pathway of disease, which sort of speaks to this work, like containing the waste for some time is not enough. Eventually, that waste may be emptied by one of these guys and get dumped in the environment. So that hasn't really been quantified because we don't, like I said, this is invisible work. This happens in the middle of the night. No one's going out there and quantifying the volume of waste that's dumped by, each individual sanitation worker. No one knows how many sanitation workers there are or how often people use them. And these are all big questions, but what we do know is that containing the waste is simply not enough.
Thank you. Another question, what type of chemicals could be safely used to clean the equipment by the employees?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know exactly what they use, but they use a range of disinfectants to disinfect. So there's a couple of tools that they use. They use a trash fisher, which is it's kind of like a hook tool that they stick into the septic tank or the pit latrine to fish out the solid waste and put it into those blue barrels. And at the end of the job, they have to sanitize that before putting it back on the truck. They also have to sanitize the gloves and other PPE. This goes for the workers who are emptying as well as the workers at the plant. I mean, most commonly people use bleach. I think there are some other disinfectants available on the market, but they're using some, I don't know specifically.
Thank you. Also, if anyone else has questions, we do have a few more minutes if you want to enter any more questions into the online chat. And thank you everyone for your engagement throughout this presentation. I actually also have a follow-up question. I know that the virus that causes COVID-19 has been found in untreated sewage and wastewater, but researchers don't really know yet that the virus can be expose people to via the wastewater, via the sewage. I'm just curious what impacts COVID-19 and the pandemic has had on Pitt Vidura, on the workers, on the work that they're doing, and even more in the informal sector.
Yeah. So at first, we were quite scared because we didn't know what the viability of the virus and these waste streams would be. It seems like sometimes there have been cases of transmission in toilet plumes. I've seen in studies and somewhere in Asia, I can't remember where. But what we've more been thinking about in terms of looking for virus in the sludge is using the virus as an early detection for centers of outbreaks. Obviously in Rwanda, the public health infrastructure could use, such as can use such early warnings to really mitigate a potential outbreak, especially in these super dense areas. So we were looking into maybe, taking routine samples and sending them to a lab, but that ended up being too complicated. I haven't seen too much on transmission from exposure to fecal sludge, other than these few studies I've seen in, I think it was in China or in Hong Kong or something like that. So I think it's something to keep an eye on and to be aware of. To that extent, Pitt Vidura has definitely, increased the rate at which they swap out their PPEs and gotten really serious about enforcing, hand rinsing and hand washing and decontamination processes in general between jobs, minimizing the number of workers on the job, but they're still working. And I think, COVID has brought hygiene to the front of mind for so many people. So there's actually a higher demand for these services now than ever. Maybe before people would be like, I'll just wait till later to empty my latrine. It's a little bit overflowing, but it's fine. But now, people are scared because we don't really know about the transmission pathway between fecal sludge and people, and so people want to get that waste away. They want it to be done safely. They don't want any drippage or spillage, and I guess that's sort of a silver lining. It's kind of pushed this work and this type of work to the forefront for in a lot of ways. For the households and with the government. The government was. They were very, at the beginning of the pandemic, they were very, very much restricting a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations from moving around or doing anything. And Pitt Vidura was one of the few that got the green flag right away. You need to keep on doing what you're doing and do it even more. Please keep going. So it's been great to sort of work alongside the government in Rwanda on their control measures, and again, bringing it to the top of their agenda has been sort of blessing in disguise.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and also to our attendees. COEH is also going to be hosting a webinar on December 1st with University of California, San Diego, and they'll be talking about their wastewater monitoring system for early COVID-19 detection. So if that's a topic of interest to you, the registration isn't available yet, but will be soon. It'll be on December 1st, so keep an eye out for that talk as well.
I will definitely be attending that.
Awesome. Yeah, and then we do have another question. Are you able to share any other organizations that you might be aware of that are involved in controlling sewage and in Rwanda or in other African countries, somewhere that someone might be able to get some more additional information?
Certainly. Well, you can go to the Susanna Forum. It's SUSANA, Sustainable Sanitation Alliance is what it stands for. And there's a ton of message boards on different organizations from different countries doing a ton of great work. In East Africa, I can name a few. There's Sanitation in Kenya, in Naivasha, Kenya. They are collaborators of ours and friends of ours, and they do great work. They make fuel briquettes from the waste that they collect. They originally started in refugee camps, but have since expanded to doing just municipal waste at large. But they do really great work. So that's Sanitation in Kenya. There is also Sanergy in Kenya that has public toilets that people can use, and they turn their waste streams into various products that, again, they sell to get revenue to reinvest in their expanding their public toilet system. And one organization that I love that I've also done some work and research with is Soil in Haiti. And they're one of the really long-standing organizations in this space. They do dry toilets, so separating the urine from the feces, which makes it easier to turn into compost, and which they do. And the compost is sold to farmers, which helps replenish the soil in Haiti, which has been sadly, depleted of a lot of nutrients due to deforestation, heavy deforestation in the country. So the name of that organization is Soil. You can look up Soil Haiti. They do a lot of really great work, and through those orgs and through Susanna, you can find a lot more. There's tons in India, in Bangladesh, and in West Africa as well that are doing this type of work.
Thank you so much for sharing those. I did my best to find the right links. So for those attendees, if you want to check the chat, I did post some of the links to those organizations mentioned in the chat. So you're welcome to take a look at those organizations as well. And thank you so much, Dr. Sklar, for joining us, for presenting and sharing this really important work that you're doing. Thank you to everyone who joined us online for today's webinar. We appreciate you being here and being a part of this webinar series. And if you're also available tomorrow, we have another free webinar with Anthony Efferton and Becca Freed from the Health Research for Action at UC Berkeley. That webinar will be on health literacy and practice and risk communication. You can check out our website for more information and to register for upcoming events, CUEH at berkeley.edu/aboutCE. And thank you again all so much for being here today.
Thank you.